Hi, my name's Brian Melbourne. I'm going to start a video series on covering the Mark III extra aircraft by Kolb Aircraft. I work here at the Kolb Aircraft factory along with my wife Helen, Travis Brown, and Dennis Jackson. I hope that we've done everything it takes to make everybody happy out there in the airplane world that are dealing with the Kolbs. We're really proud of our Kolb Aircraft family. We're hoping that we get many new ones in the future. You know that the interest in building aircraft, home-built aircraft, starts to go back on the rise. It's been on decline for a little while. I'm excited about them. I've been building aircraft for many years, covering aircraft, painting, flying, about anything you can do with a small airplane. I've probably done it, whether it was right or wrong, sometime or another in my life. This series should take you all the way through the covering process. I hope I do a good job for you. I'm going to do the very best I can. I'm going to show you all the techniques that I know to build a Grand Champion quality aircraft, so that when you're done with your project, that you'll have something that you'll be proud of for many years. We're going to be using the Poly Fiber covering system. The Poly Fiber covering system for the Mark III Extra. I'm going to be using 2.7 ounce fabric, polyester fabric, to cover all of the parts on the aircraft. I'm going to be using the poly tack to do all of my glued seams. I'll be using the poly brush from the Poly Fiber company to seal the fabric for paint. I'll be doing all the painting in polytone from Poly Fiber. So to start with, we're just going to start with this video on covering the Mark III Extra. We're going to start out with the fuselage, and then we'll work our way to the vertical stabilizer and rudder. And then I hope to take you through the rest of the tail feathers and get all those covered. And I'll show you some what I consider to be good techniques for brush coating. And I'll show you some easy tricks for doing your tape lines, and how to avoid using a lot of the pink tapes that you see on a lot of aircraft. There's a lot of the covering that you can finish out with the fabric itself, and you do not actually need to cover a lot of the seams in the pinking tape. So I'll show you how to get around that, show you a few tricks, a few shortcuts. I take my time when I'm covering. It may take a little longer than some people when they're covering an aircraft, but I take a lot of pride in my work. I cover to as close to perfection as I can get. So I take a lot of pains when I'm covering, so you'll have to bear with me and have patience. You can rush through a lot of the stuff that I take my time on, and still end up with a good job. It'll still do the same thing. It'll stay there just as long. I take pride that mine looks a lot neater than a lot that I see out there. If you're just thinking about purchasing an aircraft and the fabric scares you, there's a lot of people that don't realize that it's not as tough as it looks. It's not that hard to cover an aircraft. And if you're thinking about purchasing an aircraft and the fabric is what's scaring you off, I hope this video helps you out and shows you that it's not as bad as it seems, and that you can end up with a fine product. You can do it yourself. People have been building aircraft at home for many, many years, and they come out awesome. I've been around them for most of my life and enjoy everything about them. I hope this video helps out. Let's go ahead and get started with it. Like I said, we're going to start with the fuselage, work our way through the vertical and rudder. Then we'll cover the rest of the tail feathers, and then we'll move on to the wings, and then we'll move on to finish out the ailerons and flaps. If you have any questions, you can find our phone number and all of our contact information on our website at www.kolbaircraft.com. So if you go to that website, all of our contact information is right there. Just feel free to get in touch with us, ask us any questions we have. We're here to serve. We're absolutely just really excited about what we're doing, and we're happy to answer any questions that you have. So give us a call, give us an email, check us out on the website. All of our products are there. You can see what we're all about right there. Thank you very much. Let's get on with this covering project. This is the start of a video series on covering the Mark III Extra. We've already completed the quick build, prepped and cleaned all of our parts, as you saw in the pictures earlier, and we're ready to start our fabric covering. Got our fuselage prepped up, gear legs are already aligned, everything's already been rigged. We've stripped everything back down and cleaned it up and getting it ready to cover. So we'll try and show you all the tricks and techniques to cover the Mark III Extra with a show quality covering job. We're going to start out covering the fuselage. I usually like to cover the fuselage, the vertical stabilizer, and the rudder first and get them through the paint process so that I have these parts to work on while I'm waiting on my other parts to dry in the spray booth. Keeps me moving along steady. I can go ahead and rig my cables and install my engine if I have my fuselage and vertical ready. So we're going to start out by mixing up a little MEK with our poly tack. I like to thin my poly tack about 50-50 to make it brush on easier. I use a little 1-inch natural bristle brush, and I pre-coat all my glued edges on the fuselage or any part that I'm covering before I start to cover, and I'll show you how that works as we proceed with this process. Okay, we're going to cover the bottom of the fuselage first, so that all your seams are concealed on the bottom of the aircraft. I've already glued around this tube all the way down across the top of the gear leg socket, all the way around the back longeron, around the back hoop from the boom tube, up this other side, around the gear leg, glued all the way up this side. And then we're going to glue this strip all the way across the front right here where the last of the fabric will be attached to the fuselage. And just wet your brush. I just lay a nice layer across like that. About the center. And once we're finished gluing all this, we'll be ready to cut our fabric. Start covering the bottom of the fuselage. Okay, I glued around the bottom border of the fuselage, and I've cut a piece of 2.7 ounce fabric for the Mark III. We're going to use the heavier fabric. This plane will be running a 912S Rotax 100 horsepower, so we're going to use a little bit thicker fabric on this plane. I've cut this piece 8 foot long, and my next step is just to rough trim it around the edges, just so I'm not dealing with all the extra fabric laying there. Okay, I've got my fabric rough cut and trimmed to fit the rough shape of the fuselage bottom. I've gone ahead and glued this front edge all the way across through here, and I'm going to go back and I'm going to glue the trailing edge around this ring, just a tack in the center, just to give it the tension that I'm looking for to find my cuts for my gear leg sockets. Okay, we've trimmed our fabric to kind of roughly fit the fuselage. I've glued the front edge. And I've just glued a little tack right here in the back corner, just to get a little bit of tension right through the center, the bottom of the fuselage. Then I was able to come through and find my cuts for my sides. I just cut that right around through there on both sides. Now at this stage we've already pre-glued the tube underneath the fabric, so we can actually take a small cloth and soak it with a little MEK, and we can just come through and just kind of wipe that MEK right down the edges of these tubes, and it'll tack our fabric in place, and then we can come back and glue right through the fabric into the bed of glue that we've got underneath. It'll soak right through the fabric. Hold it down for life. Now you can see I've taken just a little bit of MEK and put it in the bottom of my mixing cup. Got my rag, dip in a little bit of MEK. Then on the edges of our fabric we can just pull it over slightly, put a little bit of tension on it. Then we can just wipe that down with MEK just like that. That MEK will wake up the bed coat that we've got underneath. And stick that fabric down just like that. That just gets us roughly tacked into where we're getting close to gluing that on in there. And we'll take our poly tack and we're gonna, I usually mix in a little bit of MEK with my poly tack and get it nice and thin to where it's usable. I don't like it real thick. Then once you get that tack down, you can just take your MEK brush, your poly tack, and you can just come right in on the edge of that and just soak it right through just like that. And just go ahead and wrap him right on under. And just soak that right through just like that. That makes for an extremely solid bond. I'm real careful when I'm running my poly tack that I don't run over the edges. We don't want it to stick beyond the point where we want it, although we can, if we start ironing this and it starts to stick over the edge, we can come back with a little MEK and wake that up and get the little puckers out of it. I'll show you how to do that later. Okay, I'm going to show a little technique for how to get that MEK rag to soak down through. I use a product on my hands called Invisible Gloves, made by Poly Fiber. It coats your hands so that the MEK doesn't soak through your skin. I've already tacked the leading edge all the way up through the front longeron of the fuselage. I've already glued around my gear leg socket, and I've already glued from here down to here on the side. And I'm going to take my MEK rag. I'm just going to pull a little tension on that fabric. I'm just going to soak it right through the fabric. Wake up that glue on the back side. That MEK just soaks right through the fabric, wakes up that glue and sticks it down. And that just kind of tacks it in place. And I keep a little MEK in a cup, just keep my rag wet. Just throw a little piece of aluminum or a cap over the top of it just to keep it in good shape. Then I take my poly tack, just glue a little coat down like that. I'm not sure that you have to stick your hands in it, but I always do. I like to rub that glue right through the fabric, make sure it gets in there real nice and solid. And then just about the time it starts feeling tacky to your fingers, just back off. And just glue right on down the back side, down to there. Get it well up underneath. Just like so. Rub that in to get it good and solid. I'm going to continue to do this all the way around the perimeter of this, and then we'll be ready to trim that fabric and go ahead and iron this to type. I'm going to take my single edge razor blade. Now I've got everything tacked all the way around the side. I've got it, I went ahead and glued through the edge of the fabric, and I'm ready to start trimming my edges. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to come around with my razor blade anywhere that there's a piece of tubing or strap that's in the way of folding this fabric under. I'm going to go ahead and trim that out of the way. We don't really have to worry about frays at this point because we've already got glue along this edge, so the fabric's already sealed where I'm wrapping it underneath. I'm going to make kind of neat cuts where I'm planning on ending the fabric along the edge of the fuselage. Along the welds. All of this fabric here we'll iron with a shoe iron up underneath here to shrink any wrinkles out of it. And we're ready to go ahead and take our shoe iron and go ahead and heat along this edge, which the heat actually activates the glue again also. And that'll glue or seal up a nice edge for us to cut a straight edge along the sides of this. Okay, I've got my irons out. I've got my small shoe iron that I use to get around the tight edges. I'm going to set this iron at about 300 degrees because I'm just going to be sealing the edge along the steel parts of the fuselage and not out in the open fabric. I've got this iron preset for 250 degrees, which will be our first shrink on the fabric. I've got everything set on the top of my iron so I know where my temperatures are at. And I have a little temperature gauge to double check the iron to make sure it's going to the right temperature. So the first shrink on the bottom of this fuselage will be 250 degrees. And we've already trimmed around all of the edges, and we're ready to seal this and trim the edges up. All right, we're going to take our small shoe iron, and we're going to go ahead and go around these edges. We'll iron over the edges where we cut a straight edge along these welds. Just get them down real nice and tight. And we'll just tuck our fabric under and just get a nice seal on that along these edges. And any little wrinkles that you have in there, you can come back with your iron and you can just go ahead and iron them right out. We've got this iron set at about 300 degrees. And you have to leave that iron laying on the tube just for a little while to get the temperature up because the tube is cold. We want to get this just as neat as we can possibly get it around through here. Then when we get done ironing all this around the edges and getting everything the way we like it, I use a little piece of 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch aluminum angle to get a nice straight edge on my cut. Even though nobody besides myself will ever see this seam again, because when we cover the sides it'll be covered up forever. We'll always know it was very neatly done. And that seam could show back in the finished fabric when you're done with this. So around this back edge where we go around this radius, we just want to pull a little tension on our fabric and just go ahead and start ironing and shrinking that fabric so that it'll lay right around that edge real nice and neat, because this will be your finished work around this. No other fabric going over it. So just use the very toe of your iron, pull back on your fabric, shrink it around through there, and what we'll do is we'll pull that back out and we'll actually lay glue underneath that to glue it into place after we cut it. Okay, now we've got our piece of 1/2 by 1/2 angle. Got my single edge razor blade, a good sharp one, fresh out of the box. And we're just going to go ahead and start trimming these edges. What I do is lay my angle right over the edge. You don't want to wrap around too far to the inside or you'll be able to see that inside of your fuselage. And we're still going to have a lap when this fabric comes up. It's going to lap over this 1 inch. So it'll have a good 1.5 inch lap by the time it goes around the edge. And I just press just enough pressure just to cut through the fabric. Right down that edge. And then that fabric will just pop right off of there. Just finish up any little cuts that weren't deep enough. Just like that, and you end up with a real nice finished edge right there. We're just slightly going beyond the apex to the inside of the fuselage. Not enough that you can see it in there, but enough to get a good lap on our fabric that we're running in from the side. And you can feel how that's fairly well glued to the surface. And this cage has been powder coated, so it's got a real durable surface to it. So cutting in with the razor blade is not affecting your surface at all. And that's done just like that. Okay, we've cut and trimmed around all of the edges. We've got real nice even seams all the way around. We're going to work with this back section a little bit. I've already run around the inside of it with the shoe iron, and I've just cut right up through the center of it, right up to about there, because of course when we shrunk the fabric it gets a little tight. So what we're going to do now is we're going to just go ahead and run our glue up on the inside and go ahead and get that glued all the way up and around that inside edge. I'm just going to pull this back out, and I'm just going to cut what I believe will be roughly the inside edge of that. And I've already put a little seal of glue around this to keep that from fraying. I use good quality scissors. Fiskars work good, Dura Sharps work well. That way you can just slide the scissors along there. Just need good quality scissors, good razor blades. Then we'll take our glue, we'll pull this fabric out, and we'll go ahead and glue that inside edge real good and solid like that, around just 1/2 of it here that we're working on. And just go ahead and wrap that right all the way up and around the inside edge. Okay, we've got that inside edge on this 1/2 over here glued. We're going to do the same thing to the other half. Just kind of roll that fabric back, get your brush underneath it. That real good and soaked. There'll be nothing else lapping on this one, so you want to get this real well glued from underneath. Just go ahead and get that soaked in there real nice. And you can just take your fingers and just roll that right all the way around that inside edge. Paying fairly particular attention not to get your fingers up on the fresh fabric here. We want to keep that as neat as possible, even though it's on the bottom of the airplane. If you're having your aircraft judged in a show, they definitely look to see if your seams are very neat, and I'd like for you to be able to cover your aircraft to be a grand champion. Okay, we've glued all around the edges on the aircraft. Got our edges trimmed neat. We're wrapped and glued up under here. We've allowed our glue to dry for a couple of hours so that it's good and solid, because we've got some raw glue joints along these edges right here that we want to make sure are good and solid before we start ironing. This first ironing is just going to be to 250 degrees. Got my Black & Decker iron set at that temperature. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to start right here in the center. And I'm just going to go ahead and lay this iron on there. And I'm going to let that go ahead and start pulling in a little tension across there. Just like that. I'll go right across to the other side. And what I've done there is I've got my tension started so that I can not have any wrinkles on this. First thing I'd want to do on the back right here is go ahead and pull that iron right down along that seam. What that'll do is it'll shrink it from front to back so that it doesn't tend to want to wrinkle over the top of that tube. Then we can come on in, stand just a little back from that tube right there. We're going to try and pull a few of those wrinkles out. And then we'll just come right down this edge. Right down to the back, and then we'll do the same thing to this side. Just to kind of keep it shrinking even. Come right around through there. Then we're ready to just go ahead and iron this back side right on out. Just like that. And we want to get good tension on this. We don't want to take it all the way to final ironing, because we'll do that after it's seamed. We just want to get real close. And the neat thing about polyester fabric is once you iron it and shrink it to 250 degrees, you can pretty much just leave your iron laying right on it. It will not shrink any further. So you can pretty much just lay your iron right in there. It won't scorch, it won't continue to shrink any further. It's going to shrink to the temperature you got it set at. Now we can see when we iron this, we've got our edge glued over just a little bit far right here. I'll show you how to get rid of that in just a second. Before we go on to our next stage, I'm going to go ahead and iron the front half of this. Alright, we've got that ironed to 250 degrees. Just got all the tension, all the loose wrinkles out of it. Now you can take your MEK rag, squeeze the excess out of it, and don't get all the way over the edges with this or to wake all of your glue up, but you can go right along this edge, just like that with your MEK, and then pull your finger in the back and just pull that up right nice and even with that side. You have something that's glued over a little too far. So that's what we want to do now, is go through and just kind of do an MEK cleanup around the edges, just to make sure that nothing's stuck over too far. Make for a nice neat seam when we come back around. And don't get too crazy with your MEK, you just want to kind of just keep it right along the edges. Just kind of clean those edges up as you go. all the way around this whole aircraft, and then we'll be prepping up for covering the
Okay,
sides.
we've got the bottom surface of the fuselage covered and finished out. We've got this ironed to 250 degrees. In preparation for covering the sides, we're going to draw a 1-inch line all the way around the inside of this that we're going to pre-coat with poly tack to accept the fabric coming over the edge. This will be our final seam to finish this edge off. We'll also be gluing all of our edges that we're running the fabric to. We'll pre-glue all of those during this step so that we can get ready to start covering the sides. What I do is I use a small ruler. I just lay it in 1 inch and lay my finger along the edge, and I just start drawing a line around the edge of this. What that does is gives me a reference point of where to cut my fabric when I'm finished covering the sides. You can take those final lines that you can't get to, just lay your ruler in, just draw your line right on in there. We'll do this all the way around the border. Just like that. If you don't feel comfortable dragging a line like I do with the ruler, you can use a piece of 1-inch angle, or I use a piece of aluminum like this that's broke over at 1 inch, and you can lay that on your straight edges and just draw your lines just like that. I personally just prefer to draw my lines by hand. I just come in 1 inch. I can work right around the corners and everything that way. Finish that little line out back to here, just like that. Then we'll take our glue, our poly tack, and we're going to neatly glue this line. We don't want to get over into the portion of the fabric that's not being covered. So we'll just start right up here with a good wet brush, and I just lay a neat line right along the edge of the pencil mark that I just drew on there. And flip your brush over for a little more glue. Keep it kind of neat, don't let it run off the edges. Just like so. Then you can come back if there's anything that's kind of dripping off the edges anywhere, which I do not have. You can clean those right off like that. It gives you a nice glue bed for the fabric just coming over the side. I try and do this section really neat because I do not use any fabric tapes on my finish. I just use this lap as my finish product. Neatly up around the edges. And you also don't want to get too much of this glue around the edges because it will wake up the other glue underneath and turn your fabric loose, which is a bad thing at this point. I'll just continue that right on up around the front. that. All right, at that point I'm going to take my glue. Now I'm going to come around the edges and I'm going to pre-glue all the way around to the inside edge, because the side fabric is going to wrap and finish all the way to the inside edge of the longeron. So we want to glue almost the entire tube. So we just come right around the edge with our glue like this. We'll start out on the side here. Then we'll go ahead and wrap underneath. And every once in a while you get a little run down the side of one of your other tubes that you do not want glued. Just go ahead and catch that with your finger and head right on. So we're actually gluing almost the entire tube all the way around. And I just take one little section at a time, take my time. It's not a race. We're going to be able to take what we're doing here and win some awards with it. Just like that, I'm going to do this all the way around the border of the sides. Yeah, I've gone around and I've glued all the edges around the bottom of the fabric for my lap. And I've glued all of the edges that I've planned to glue to all around the edges of the fuselage. What I'm going to do at this point is I'm going to do a small cut here. By my landing gear, I've cut an 8-foot piece of fabric, and I plan to use one piece of fabric to cover both sides of the airplane. So I've just used a small clamp up on the front edge here. I've just kind of pulled it around where it sits kind of uniform, clamped it to the trailing edge, just so I can get a good idea of where my fabric's going to lay. Just going to cut that right there just a little bit, just to kind of let that relax. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rough cut this around this edge so that I can salvage my other piece of fabric to do the other side with. I'm going to allow just a couple of inches, maybe 3, right around the edge. And I'm going to pay particular attention to what I want to cover. I want to come right around this edge right here. So I'm going to cut right along that edge. Kind of leaning back into it a little bit so I can see where it's at. I'm going to cover all the way to this top surface right there. Put that right back to there. Then I can take my other piece of fabric, and I should be able to turn it the opposite direction and go right around to the other side. And use it for the other side of my fuselage. We'll see how that worked out. We want to take our factory edge and bring it back up to the top. We'll just bring it right in where we plan to make our seam. Go ahead and clamp that in there. Pull it right around to the back. And if all worked out well, which it seems that it did, we should have enough to cover the other side with. We'll clamp that right in. Then we just need to take a little cut right in here like we did on the other side, just to kind of relieve that a little bit and see that we have our coverage. And I have plenty of fabric to cover both sides of the aircraft. Looks like this needs to come down a little bit. About like that. Beautiful.
All right, so we're going to start out by just covering this one side here. We've got a piece of fabric roughly cut in. We've got a factory edge right here, so I go ahead and take advantage of that. And I go ahead and start at the front, and I start gluing that factory edge of the fabric right back to this curve. And then I'll go ahead and curve the fabric on around that and finish this front side off without having to make a cut. So we'll start out by gluing that. So take the clamp out, hold your distance, put a fresh layer of glue right there on the front. And then just pull your fabric right over to your pencil line. And just glue that right down just like that. And we'll have to let this set up for just a little while so that we can pull a little tension to the other end. And I usually take a little bit of glue and I just come right back over the surface of that. And basically what we're doing is we're capturing that fabric in between the glue layers. And then you can run your glue just a little bit beyond your fabric edge, about beyond your pencil mark. And just hang on to that for a moment and let that kind of start tacking up. And once you feel like you've got that under control, go ahead and just let that set up a little bit. Hang on to it with the other hand. Then you can just go ahead and take your clamp, put your clamp right back in to hold it in place. If it feels like it's going to stay there, you're good to go. Just go ahead and let that set up for a little while. Okay, I started out by gluing this front edge just a little bit right along the edge of my pencil line. Clamped it back in place and let that set up. And then I followed that line all the way back, right around the curve, and I've made a small relief cut right here so that I could glue that right on back to the edge right there. So we just followed our pencil line all the way around. The other side of the fuselage, I'm working my fabric in the same way, covering both sides at the same time. Started out by gluing the front edge, followed the line right back around the curve, and I've stopped and I'm waiting for that to set up right there to go back and do my little relief cut and finish up on that gear leg right there. Now we've taken our two front halves and we've glued them along our line that we drew earlier, and we've glued them down along the top surface, or actually the bottom surface of the fuselage with it upside down. Now the next thing we want to do is we want to kind of stretch our fabric and get a little bit of the wrinkle out where we've made this curve. We'll have a little pucker right there to pull out. And we want to get our front half to where it lives before we start continuing on to our back half, or we'll find ourselves with too much fabric or have it too tight. So we're going to go ahead and get our MEK rag, and we're just going to tack this around the edges here a little bit. We'll start out by hitting this leading edge. We'll get that to stick down right there. Just let that set up for just a moment. That'll be the start of getting this side kind of straight. And of course your iron will take out a lot of your wrinkles, so you don't have to worry about too much. Fix it later, let that set up just a little bit. While we're waiting for that to dry, I'll go on over and tack the other leading edge. Let that dry for a moment.
hang on to that just for a moment and let that set up where it'll stay. Alright, we've got that sitting in place. Now we're just going to start right here. We're not going to try and wrap this fabric underneath the lip yet. We just want to stick it to the side of the longeron. And remember, this is just to tack it in place. Make it stay put till we're ready to glue it. We just got our MEK rag and we're just kind of waking the glue up underneath there. We'll make that stay put for us. Okay, now we can see we're going to have to make a cut where that's going to wrap. So we can get a little bit of glue to keep this from fraying. We'll clean our brush out real good. And right in this corner where we're going to wrap around, let's just glue just a little line right through there. When that sets up and we cut that fabric, it'll keep it from fraying along those edges. We're going to do the same thing right here where we know we're going around that edge. We'll go ahead and put a little glue on that. We'll go on around and do the same to the other side while that's setting up. I'm going to go ahead and take a little glue while I got this, and I'm going to go ahead and glue this leading edge so that it'll stay put while we're working. We're going to do the same on this side. Get that to stay. Just putting a little glue on the top of it and just working it right through the fabric. And then we'll go ahead and where we're tacked back to right now, let's just take a small layer of glue just right along just the apex of that tube. Don't try and get too deep with it. Just like that. And that'll keep that fabric from coming loose on us. Just like that. Now our glue's set up here. So we can take our pencil and we can go ahead and pull this fabric to where it looks like it's going to end up. And we can go ahead and draw a little line where we'd like to stop that cut right in the corner of that. Just go ahead and take your scissors, just cut right up to that point. That way we can wrap back here, we can wrap back there. I'm not sure exactly where that's going to land yet, so we're not going to play with that one yet. Get our MEK rag back out. We'll just go ahead and glue that right back to there. Do the same thing with our brush right through here. We'll just get a little glue line up there just to hold that in place. And while I'm working, if my poly tack starts to get a little too thick, I just add just a little MEK to it and just keep it thin and workable. Then we'll just start coming right on around the side here. And know roughly where we're going. Just like that. Pull this down kind of tight. while your glue's still drying up there. And then we can tack right around the edge of that. Let me grab my scissors. Once I know where I'm going to end up here, I'll just go ahead and cut that right into that corner. You can mark that with a pencil if you like so that you don't miss it. Looks pretty good to me. Now on this one, since it's around the curve, I'm going to go ahead and just run a little glue line around the inside edge over top of what I've already got glued under there. Then I can just pull that right around and go ahead and start pulling that into shape. And just work that glue right into the fabric. Just like that. And just go ahead and get your brush and pull a coat around the outside of it.
Okay, now we're tacked along the front edge and we're back to our gear leg socket. I'm going to pull in a little bit closer here so you can see what I'm doing around this socket. Hoping you'll be able to tell what I'm doing. Alright, what I've got is I've got my fabric comes right around the front edge here where we had already cut that relief cut. Then we want to kind of pull some of the slack up and get this even with the bottom right there. And we want to just lay our scissors right on the inside edge of that gear leg socket and just make a little cut right down through there. And what that'll do is that'll leave us a little flap to glue to the back of our gear leg socket. Going to trim out just a little bit of depth right there so that we get a decent line. That'll glue right back in there. I'm going to trim on out around the gear leg socket so that that'll lay in there neatly. A little relief cut right there to make that lay flat. And that'll glue right along the inside edge right there. This will glue right up to the side of the gear leg socket right there. Then when we're finished gluing all of this, we'll do a reinforcing patch right around the whole edge of this, and the flaps of that will come up on the inside, up on both edges, and reinforce that piece of fabric right there. So I'm going to go ahead and start gluing all this in place. You can see how that's going to go. Okay, we've got glued all the way back to here, and I've just come through and cut and glued the seams around the gear leg socket. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to unclamp this, and we don't want to have too much fabric laying up here, so we're going to find the straightest shot to the back edge, which is right there, and we'll clamp that down. Then once we glue this, we can stretch this fabric back to the corner. I'm going to go ahead and do a little bit of it now to show you what I'm talking about. You can just kind of start stretching the fabric back like this, and that'll start to get all of your excess material out that's going to eventually end up here. Now you're going to still have a small wrinkle in here, and when you come back and iron, you'll be able to pull that out of it. So we're going to go ahead and start by just gluing this edge right down through here and getting us ready to stretch that fabric all into the top. Now when I glue this section, I'm not going to tack it. I'm just going to go ahead and glue it on into place. But I'm not going to wrap the glue all the way around to the edge of my pencil line that we drew earlier. I'm just going to glue it right on the apex, because we're going to come back and smooth iron that and do a nice glued edge on it. So we just want to come right down through the apex of that tube, just lay a nice neat line there. and just go ahead and just rub that right on in. Get that to where it starts to stay in place. Stick that down. Keep working our way back toward the back edge. We'll pull a few of our little wrinkles out. Smooth a spot and glue a spot. Just like that. It's doing real nice. Pull it right on back to the back edge. Just go ahead and hold that down where it's in just a little bit there and let that glue kind of start to tack up. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and let that start to set up because I want that to stay pretty solid, because I want to come back and just rough trim this. And then we'll draw a straight line with our pencil line, and we'll do a glue seam on that so it doesn't fray. And then we'll go ahead and trim that that seam right there, and we'll go ahead and lap that on over and get that done. Then we'll start gluing in our back edge and start to work our way back up to the front. But we want this good and solid and glued complete before we really start stretching on that fabric so it'll stay in place. Okay, we've just done a slight small glue line right down this edge right here to hold all this in place. That's good and solid. I went ahead and glued it around this trailing edge right in here so that that'll stay put. And I've just done just a rough trim to get close to our pencil line. I'm within about an inch of it. And I'm going to draw that same line again on my new fabric that I drew earlier so that those lines match. And that's going to be our cut line for our seam. Right up through there. Once you get that line drawn, you want to get your glue brush and clean it out fairly well. You don't want your glue real thick. You need to thin it out if it starts to thicken up on you. And I haven't had to thin it any during this process so far. I'm just getting my brush good and loaded up with glue. I'm just trimming it off to a nice clean edge. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start right here, and I'm just going to run a tiny little glue line right down where I'd like to cut that, which is over the pencil mark that I just made on it. I'll just glue that all the way down this other end. I use my pinky to hold as a guideline to keep my brush in the right spot. And I'm just going to glue that line right down through to the bottom. And the reason I've done that is I want that not to fray when I cut it. So I'm just going to rub my fingers in behind here. I'm just going to keep that from actually sticking to the surface because I want it to dry in place and I can cut it with the scissors. So we'll just let that dry out for a moment. Doesn't take real long. It's a little bit of a rainy day here in Kentucky, so the glue is not drying real fast. And I'll get my scissors, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to slide cut that all the way to the top, right on that seam. So I like to get my scissors to where I'm just about a 1/4 inch in on my blade so that I can look and see where they're cutting. And then I normally take my fingers out of the hole so I can guide it up through there. And then once I get that cutting, I'll stay right on that pencil mark that I've made. And I'll cut right up that pre-glued fabric right on my pencil line to make a real nice, neat seam. I'm holding tension back on this to keep that fabric from rolling and wrinkling. And I'll just take that seam right on up to the gear leg, cutting right along that pencil mark that I made. Just like that. Now what you're going to end up with is a really nice seam. It's going to be very clean. And I have people argue with me that it's on the bottom of the airplane, so what does it matter? It matters. We want to make it as neat as possible. And if it doesn't come out as neat as you'd like for it to, I guess it really doesn't matter in the long run. As long as it's a good solid glue joint, it really does hold. Now what I do at this point is I go ahead and take my glue on my brush and I go ahead and brush in behind this. The reason I'm having to brush behind this one and not trying to soak it through is I've already sealed the fabric along the edge. So I need the glue all the way down in there, and I still remain neatly to my pencil line that I've got underneath. I'll take it about a foot at a time, and I'll just go ahead and start tacking that down, smoothing that out, tack it down, real nice like that, and just get everything laying down real nice and smooth. And we'll work our way right on up the edge. I'll just roll that back a little bit. Glue in behind it just a touch. Get that where that's going to stay. And then come back in. Smooth that out. Like that. Right on up to the top. I'll go ahead and take this one all the way and just go ahead and finish this right on out. You don't have to take as big a jump as I do. You can do a little bit at a time. And then I'm just going to start rolling that over. And I like to take my finger right here and just kind of stretch the fabric forward to me as I'm laying this down. And if there is any slack in it, we're going to pull it all out to the gear leg up the top. Just like that. Now once we have that smoothed down, we want to get our glue again. Start back up at the top. And our glue is nice and thin. And we're just going to do a little brush coat right along the edge of that seam. We're going to really soak it in there. Go ahead and put some glue on it. And what that'll do is that'll soak right through the fabric. We'll just rub that in real nice and light. Make it nice and smooth. And that's soaking right through my tape seam, right down into my original glue bed. I'm running my brush just slightly over the edge of the pencil line. That way it soaks in along the edge of that. Makes for a real nice seam. And I just use my glue down like that. You could carry a rag along with you to clean the excess glue off your fingers. My wife doesn't mind that I just wipe it off on my pants until she sees this video. Just like that. I'm going to snap a picture of this and put it on the video so that you can see what that come out like. Now we're ready Once that sets up, I'm going to go ahead and do the other side right quick while I'm letting that glue dry. Then we'll be able to go ahead and start stretching and straightening out our fabric to glue our top line and our back edge here. And we're well on our way to having the side cover. Okay, our glue's had a little while to set up. We've attached everything through here. I brought the other side up to the same stage as where we're at here. Next, we're going to go ahead and glue this back edge, do a little bit of trimming. I'll let the camera roll while I'm doing that, and then I'll show you how to get that little bit out right there. So we're going to pull this back, find our point where we want to get it out. Cut a little relief cut here. We want to run right around that edge with a finish cut so we can wrap up under here and wrap around this edge. So we'll just pull a little line back through there, one right down through there, and right back through there. We'll let that go ahead and dry a little bit. Pull it down tight. Decide where we want our cut. We'll cut to right there to wrap inside. Then we'll have a little relief cut right around here. I've already pre-glued this one. So we'll cut right up and around this little tube here in the back. So we can wrap that around the back side. Trim this off on the top. Make the turn. And then we're just going to do a little cut down through here. Go right around that edge. Figure out where we're going here. Straight down from there. Let's go ahead and cut that right on off. Then come up around through there. Went a little beyond my glue line there, so I'm just going to go ahead and, before that starts to fray, I'm just going to tack a little glue along that edge. I'll hold all those strands in place. And we'll go ahead and glue this back edge. So we'll just roll this back, get a little bit of glue up in here. Just right on around to the inside. And we'll come right on up this side. We'll go ahead and tack this whole trailing edge. And just get it out of our way. We've got a little glue along the back edge there where we're doing that finished seam. We'll trim this inside off when we start finishing out the inside edges of this. So right now we're just wrapping it to the inside, and we'll just let it be there. This will squeeze glue through. You'll feel the glue on your fingers coming through the fabric. Just finish that out like that. Start working our way around the side. We've got our cable attached brackets right up inside of here, so that's what I trimmed this for. It's just to lay up on the inside edge of that. And then we'll pull a little bit of fabric out with some heat here in a moment. So we're going to go ahead and pull this up. Glue up under this edge, glue right along the edge of that longeron,
up onto that little bracket and around through here for a little finish work. Then we'll pull a little tension and just go ahead and just tack that right on into place, just like that. Right around the back edge, just like that. Any glue running down the side, just go ahead and catch it. And then that's got that well taken care of. Go ahead and tack this up in here. Make sure that everything's sticking good along this edge. And we'll just hang on to that for a moment. Let that glue start to tack up. And that's got us glued all the way down our trailing edge, all the way down through here. We're glued right along the edge here, and that's going to be a finished seam right through there. And then we're starting to wrap around the inside edge. That glue's already starting to set up. That's a good thing. We've already glued along this edge right through here, so all we have to do is come up with our finish cut right through this section. I'm going to go ahead and glue that now while I'm thinking about it. Keep that from fraying. We can see where that's going to cut down through there, and it's going to cut right across there. We want to go ahead and glue this in place before we start heating this fabric, and that needs to set up for a moment. So we're just going to let this go ahead and dry for just a second. Cut right through there, right up to it, and that's what's going to wrap around the edge. I have a little bit of excess fabric right here, so I'm going to take my iron. I've turned this iron back down to about 250 degrees, and I'm just going to iron just a little bit of fabric right in there just to take up some of the slack. Then we'll glue this back edge up under that seam and right along this laundry rod back about 4 inches or so. And then we'll just go ahead and take that fabric and wrap it right on inside, just like that. And we'll hold that in place while that sets up. And then we'll go ahead and tack this in. And I'm stretching a little fabric back. Make sure that goes in well. Then we can take our iron and just touch that a little bit right in there to go ahead and make that go ahead and set right on up. Just hang on to that for a moment, let that set up. Now we can see by making our turn back here, we've got a lot of compound curves through here, so there's a lot of excess fabric. So we're just going to let that set up for just a little bit. It won't have to be long because we're not going to pull a lot of tension on it. We're just going to take our 250 degree shoe iron. We'll start pulling this in. I'm just going to start right up in here, and I'm just going to start shrinking that fabric down a little bit. What that does for us is it starts to pull it back to where we have a nice straight line along this longeron. So we're actually pulling tension while we're ironing, and that keeps it from crinkling up under the iron. So we'll hit this right there. You can see how we're starting to get a nice straight line. I'm going to go ahead and pull up a little bit high right here. Start taking up a little bit of fabric. And then we'll start again back here. We'll start heating this down. I'm holding that just slightly off of the longeron so that I'm not actually touching it with the iron. That way my fabric shrinks evenly and starts to pull back along that edge. And then you can pull a little tension back at an angle, and then just start going ahead and tightening that on up a little bit. Now we've got a nice light iron right now, about 250 degrees, so we're not trying to do any finish shrinking. We're just trying to absorb a little bit of that fabric. I'm going to switch around to the other side here. Then we'll take our glue, we'll pull our fabric back, and we'll just glue that edge right through there, about halfway back. Then glue it on up around the edge just a little bit, and we'll go ahead and start attaching that. And you can see by taking up the excess fabric that we had, now we'll end up with a nice straight line across through here. And we're not worried about the excess fabric hanging on the inside yet. We'll trim all that later. So that turned out to be a real nice edge through there. I'm going to put a little more glue on the surface. Make sure that that's in there well. Just like that. Yeah, it seems to be staying pretty good. Now we've got this little section right here that is not glued yet. So we'll reach up around the back side and we'll just kind of watch the shadow of our brush so that we can get inside of there. And we'll just let that brush kind of run up around the edge here a little bit. I can see my brush through there and see where I'm going. And then we'll pull a little tension on that fabric and we'll finish that right on out just like that. Now, that's enough glue on that to go ahead and iron to 250 degrees on the side. We've already wrapped this all the way around to the inside. We've already finished our seam up here. We've got everything wrapped around the inside except for the front. I'm gonna tuck that just a little bit further to make sure it's good and solid before we iron this side. I'm gonna add a little more glue here. Make sure this is tacked well. Right down through there. Rub that in. And that's got us moving right along on it. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and do a little pre-glue in here where I'm going to cut a few lines. I'm going to glue a line right around where I know I need to cut that so that my fabric doesn't fray. I've got this tube here. I'm just going to glue a little bit there, straight line down on both sides. Anything that's going to be in my way to just move that, just to cut that flat up in the bottom. So we'll let that glue tack up just a little bit. And I've already glued this around the inside when we were doing it originally. I've already got this glued, and this has been setting up for a couple of hours, so this is good and solid here. This is a joint that needs to be glued solid and dried well before you start ironing these sides. So now we can take our scissors and we can go ahead and cut up to where that edge is going to be, straight across for a finished cut right there, and then straight up. That way that can start to wrap to the inside right there. We're going to do the same thing across the front here, finished cut, and then where it's going to wrap. We'll get ready to wrap that right to the inside. So now we can go ahead and take our brush, come in the back side, and look for the edge of your brush and just brush right along the edge of your fabric and the bottom of the tube. And then we'll go ahead and wrap that to the inside. Again, we're not worried about the excess right now. We're going to finish all that out when we start to cut and trim the inside of the fuselage. And I'm going to go ahead and put a little bit of glue right up under that seam so that we can get that finished seam down and stuck well. Make sure that doesn't pull loose when we start to iron. And then we'll run just a little bit of glue under this bottom edge, just to double that up. And that's there. I'm going to do the same down the rest of this side. We're going to let that set up for just a little while, and then we'll jump back on and we'll go ahead and iron this side and get it ready to go. Okay, we've got everything glued around the edges. I just glued them just flush to the top edge. We still have our trailings on the inside of the fuselage. But we're going to go ahead and iron this side and get it tight. I usually start right up on the leading edge, up in the front edge of the fuselage. I have my iron set for 250 degrees. We're not going to take this fuselage to the final 350 degree temperature until we have everything finished out.
Now what I'm doing while I'm ironing is I'll take a spot that has a little deeper pucker, and I'll go ahead and start pulling that from the top. You can see how when I pulled that, it pulled that out of it. If you iron over the top of those, you'll get a little wrinkle in your fabric that's really hard to get rid of. So we're just gonna work our way down this side. I'll come right through the center to pull this out and see that draw down. And if I'm glued a little too far over the edge like I am right there, I'm just going to run my finger through there and just pop that loose right through there. Which you can do with a little MEK, but in this stage on an open fuselage you can pretty much just reach in and do it. We'll clean that edge up just a little bit. Iron right along that edge. Now we've glued along the edge of this socket, and we've let that dry for several hours because it will pull that loose if you're not extremely careful with it. So iron right up to that edge. Get that where it's nice and tight up in there. Get a little bit of a wrinkle here, so we'll just go ahead and heat this back in here to start pulling that over. Down in there. Like that. Then just go ahead and heat it on down through here. Iron this section up in here. You're just kind of being kind of gentle with your iron. You don't want to rub it too hard along the edges of your tubes. It could scratch its way through. And we'll just continue to iron right on back toward the tail section. Start pulling some tension in some of this from up here on the top. And on back to the trailing edge. Then we'll do our center section here. Trying to keep the iron nice and flat to the fuselage. Now you can see I got a little wrinkle right here. If I was to run the iron across that, it would wrinkle that over. So we want to kind of pull that back out of there and start working that toward the back, like that, and get that nice and even through there. That way when we go ahead and heat this back side up, you can see it start pulling those out of there, and then we'll just work our way all the way to the top. And we'll see those disappearing. We'll roll right over that edge. And by the time we get up to this, it'll be gone. See how that's completely gone now? I can just iron right on up to the front now. Now we've still got a little bit of a issue right here. We'll just go ahead and start ironing the front side of that. We'll pull that down a little bit. Heat that up. Sometimes you got to leave the iron on where there's a tube through just a little bit longer because you actually have to heat the tube up to temperature to make it pull correctly. And then we can just pull all that out of there, come right up to our gear leg. Socket just like that. And that's got that side to 250 degrees. And at this point we're ready to go ahead and flip this cage over, get right up inside and start finishing out these edges. We'll roll this top edge right here in, and then we'll be ready to cover our turtle deck for our fuel tank area on the inside with the fuselage flipped over. Okay, we've got the fuselage turned over now, and we're ready to start trimming and cutting along the inside edges and getting all of these edges rolled over to the inside for a finished seam
I'm going to try and rearrange the camera just a little bit so that you can see this side as I'm working on it, which would be the same side that we were working on covering originally. And we'll go ahead and start wrapping that to the inside. And we'll also be getting this turtle deck area ready for the top fabric. Okay, we're ready to start working on the inside edges. And we're going to have to be kind of careful at this point as we're working through here. Make sure that we don't drip any glue down on the inside of the fuselage, because if all goes well, I plan to spray the outside of the fuselage with UV silver and use that gray tint on the inside, because this plane will have a gray interior, so that actually works pretty good, and it comes out with a nice light gray tint. So what I'm going to do first off is I'm going to take my pencil and I'm going to start marking around any obstacles that I need to cut around. So I'll just mark those out like that, because we want this to fold right around to the inside edge. So any place there's a little tab like this or this, or a door hinge point, we want to go ahead and get our finish edge marked along that. Mark it right on out. Finish edge, mark right on out to the edge. And then we're going to take this, just continue to mark all this. And then what I'm going to do at that point is I'm going to go ahead and glue around these edges so it doesn't fray. And then I'll cut all those out, and then we'll come back and start gluing that around the edges. Okay, I've glued along the edge around all of these seams so that I can cut these out. Should snap a little picture of that I can throw in with the video right quick, so you can get a good close-up of what I've done. And I've glued around these edges of these seams so that the fabric won't fray. Get a little shot of that there. And a little shot of that right there. Then I'll just take my scissors and I'll go ahead and cut around these to where I know it's going to lap inside. Do a test fit around through there so that we know it'll clear everything. Right up to the longeron. We'll do kind of a neat cut across the top of these, because those will be a finished seam when we're done. Everything seems to be working real well. I went ahead and glued around the edge of this for a finished seam down across the front of that. Wrap right around the inside of that. Cut that out. Things seem to be fitting real nice. Nothing else is getting in our way. Got one little edge right there where this tube comes down to the diagonal. I'm going to do a little finish cut right along that and get that out of the way. So that when we wrap around the inside edge, we won't have that hindering us. Got another one right here where that tube's coming down the inside. You'll see I've dropped a couple of rags down along the bottom here. That way if I drip just a little bit, they'll catch it for me. And we're looking pretty good through here. So we'll just go ahead and start with this piece while we're waiting for that to dry, where I'm going to trim those in a few spots. We're clear all the way up through here, so let's just go ahead and start gluing that. Now what I want to do is just fold this back, glue right along that edge, and then glue right around the inside, all the way up to under the edge there. All the way under that edge. Try not to get it on the fabric under there. We'll just go ahead and roll this right on under. Smoothing that out across the top as we go. Tuck him right under like this. And what we're going to do is, after I get this glued around under the edge, we'll get a razor blade and we'll just trim that off to a nice neat edge on the inside. And I'm kind of stretching the fabric with my fingers as I go around to tuck it to the inside to get a nice smooth surface up here. Even though we can come back with an MEK rag and clean that up a little later. When we paint this fuselage, I'm going to paint all the way to the inside edge. So I'll be masking from the inside to cover all this deck so that none of my overspray gets inside the fuselage, and we'll show you how to do that when we get to the painting stage of the Mark III Extra. That's come out real nice right there. Now this glue's had time to set up, so we're going to go ahead and do our finish cut right up through there to where that'll wrap right around that inside edge. Then I had another one right here. We'll do a finish cut right there, and that'll just finish out right there. Everything else looks good. Put my glue around on my right hand side because I'm hopelessly right-handed. Get our rags tucked up in there a little bit. And then we'll just fold this whole piece back. Do the same glue right along that edge right there. Around through there. Around that edge to finish. Up underneath. And we'll start just folding that and wrapping it right on up underneath there. Just kind of tuck in as we go. Get that nice and finished up in there, smooth everything out. I've got a finished seam around this outside edge here. I'm just going to go ahead and hit that with just a little bit of glue. Seal that edge. We've dropped that around through there. And we'll work our way right on around. Then where we've got these little seams on top, when we fold this back, we'll be able to get a little bit of glue underneath that too, so that finished seam will be able to be finished right on out. Under that edge, right on back, I'll stop about right there. Just a little bit of drip on my fabric. Just go ahead and catch that right now, and I can come back and clean that up with a little MEK. Same thing again, just wrap that right around to the inside edge, just like that. Catch that one's actually got all of its finished edges already done. And we'll catch that seam right across the top there. Without fraying the fabric out, you can smooth that out pretty good. These tabs are to attach your fiberglass seat to, so this will actually all be covered by the seat, but we'll still, when we paint it, we'll still paint it as if we're going to see it forever. And while we're gluing this up underneath the edge like this, that's actually sealing that fabric, so when we cut that, it may still be a little bit loose from the edge, but we'll come back and we will re-glue that when we get to that stage. So we're just going to throw a little bit under this edge here. Take this one right on back. Tuck and roll that underneath. Catch that little seam while we're right here. And this one didn't glue into there quite as far as I wanted to, so I'm going to hit that with just a little bit more. Go ahead and tuck that on in there. And we'll be able to work the same right on up this edge right here. Go ahead and start tucking that around. Pull this out. Glue up along that edge. Right back up in there. And just kind of roll and tuck that right around the edge. This fabric is really forgiving. It doesn't, it stretches around pretty nice because where you come around this radius, it's in a bias cut, or the fabric's at an angle this way. So it'll contour around there real nice without having to apply any heat. Okay, and that's got our edge done right around the edge, all the way across this side. We'll be able to come through after that tacks up. We'll just take a razor blade and we'll just cut that out real nice and neat along that inside edge. And then we'll move on back here and start finishing out this section for the turtle deck. Alright, we've wrapped our edge around the inside of all of this. We'll be ready to trim that shortly. I'm going to go ahead and trim this turtle deck back in here. And what we're going to do is we're just going to trim this right along the top edge just a little bit to the inside edge of this, because this will be covered with fabric and lapped over the edge about an inch. So this will be lapped down to right in here for the turtle deck covering, and then that'll finish that out. So we can just go ahead and lay our little piece of 1/2 inch angle just a little beyond the inside edge. Go ahead and trim cut that right across through the inside edge of that. Then we'll be able to come back in and just drop a little glue up under that edge and finish that right on out. Okay, we're going to continue to just cut along these edges and get all this turtle deck area ready to go. Get our little piece of 1/2 inch angle again. We'll just work right along this back edge here. Just slightly over the apex so that it doesn't show on our top turtle deck fabric. Alright, there we go. Now we'll come back in And we'll go ahead and glue this edge right on over. Just drop a little bit up under the edge there. Kind of roll that on down. Nice clean edge up top for our turtle deck fabric to come across. And we'll just go ahead and add a little extra glue to the top up here, so when we come across with our turtle deck, it'll have a good glue bed to get down into. Everything laying down nice and neat. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing to the opposite side that we just cut over there. And we'll be ready to, I'm going to go ahead and glue this other edge too, and then we'll get back and we'll start trimming this inside edge. Okay, so we've glued this edge over, and I've gone ahead and cut and trimmed the back edge for the turtle deck, and I've glued that edge over onto the inside, and I've also glued the other side wrapped around the inside. So next we're going to take our iron and we're just going to touch up these edges and make sure we don't have any little wrinkles or anything. These actually feel pretty good, but I'm going to touch them up anyway and make sure everything's stuck well underneath. Then we'll get our new razor blade and we'll start cutting around the inside edge. Gives us an opportunity to just go through and catch anything that might have wrinkled up a little bit in the drying process. Cleans it up pretty nice. Got my iron set at about 300 degrees so that it heats up that tubing just a little bit. It's really hard to get the fabric up to temperature when you're right on the steel frame like that. Just working right around the edge there. That feels pretty good. And we can come around that with a little bit of MEK. Of our MEK cup. And we can clean that edge up around through there, smooth out any glue bumps that come through. That looks good. You don't want to do too much here, you'll take all your glue off, and you don't want to do that. Just want to clean up your fingerprints and any glue that popped up through the edge. And I'm going to go ahead and do that all the way around and get everything cleaned up, and then we'll jump back in here and start the trimming process after that MEK has time to set up. Alright, we've let our MEK set up a little bit on these edges where we've cleaned them up and we've ironed it around under the edges. We're feeling pretty comfortable, everything's where we like it. Got a new razor blade. I usually just do this by hand. You can cut a smaller piece of angle that will fit around the inside edge, and you can use that for a straight edge under there. Be very careful not to cut through the side of the fabric. I just usually come up underneath the bottom and I put my finger behind it to protect the fabric in the back. And just trim that right out, and that's a real nice neat edge underneath there. Keep your seam well underneath. You don't have to be as particular under the seat here. It'll never be seen again once the seat's installed. But I like for them to be able to remove their seats and see that it's done the same all the way through. That makes for a very nice neat edge under there. Now what we'll do at this point, it's going to be hard to show on video, but we'll give it a try. I'm gonna take my glue and I'm just going to come back and I'm going to re-glue that seam. I can feel under there that just absolutely cut perfect. I got a real nice neat line. I just want to put a good glue line underneath there to make sure that fabric stays put, because we're going to come back with masking tape when we paint, and I'm going to tape this on the inside edge here. So I want to make sure it doesn't pull my fabric back up. So I take my poly tack and I'm just going to run a little line right up underneath there. I normally turn the fuselage upside down for this stage, but it seems to be working just fine like that. I can feel my glue. I can feel it got a good edge on it. So we'll just do that across. You don't want to push your brush all the way through where it leaves a line on your fabric. We'll just get it just up underneath the edge of that fabric, and I can feel that glue just went in there real nice. And glues that down, makes a nice finished seam through there. And when I came through with my MEK, I cleaned this edge up and it come out real nice. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit more glue across the top of it just to make sure we've got a good surface on that for the paint. Yeah, that's sealed out real nice. I've got my poly tack. I'm still keeping it kind of thin. I'm just going to run an edge coat right on that right there around to the inside. I'm just going to smooth that out. That'll make for a nice finished surface for the paint to stick to. Do a little more around the inside edge. And just smooth that right out in there. That looks beautiful. And every time you put a layer of glue on like this, it wakes up the glue underneath it, and it completes that sandwich of the fabric with glue underneath it and on top of it. And that's a good looking finish we're getting on there. All right, I'm going to do that same thing on the other side. I'm going to trim it out and I'm going to glue it in the same manner. And then we've still got our edges on the front up here. We're going to wrap those and do them the same way that we did these sides. And also where we wrapped into the back of the fuselage, we're gonna trim that out on the inside of there too. It'd be hard to show on film, so I'm just going to do it the same way that I did this and just finish those seams out. And then we'll get back on film here and finish up on the turtle deck on the back and a couple of patches on the side, and we'll be done with our fuselage and ready for brush coat.